All right, folks. Welcome everybody once again to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with my good buddy Jamie Uyeyama, and we're going to talk some Notre Dame football and football recruiting today. Probably going to be very heavy football today, Jamie, because hey, or I mean, not football, very heavy recruiting today because they seem to be doing well in that regard, and we got official visits coming up soon. The Irish coaches will get on the road and start visiting players. I think it's this week they get out on the road and start looking for prospects, not just for 2026, but also 2027, 2028. They'll be doing lots of visiting and being on the road. So we'll get into that and also answer your questions. Before we do, wanted to mention our first sponsor, which is ESQ. ESQ Clothing has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade. It's been featured on GQ, ESPN, USA Today, and you've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills. With over 40,000 fabrics to choose from, you're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com and book your appointment. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Once again, that's esqclothing.com. All right, Yama, I guess the first thing we want to talk about is the latest stuff, which is the NFL draft. I thought it went about what I thought it would. I was glad to see Ben Morrison, get drafted where he did. I think he was a little relieved based off of his response. He certainly seemed very excited and overwhelmed, and that's great to see. For a kid like that to come back from what he's gone to and went to the Buccaneers. Of course, then Xavier Watts. I had to say, is a little surprised he slid a little bit compared to where I thought he would kind of go low, late second round, but there weren't a lot of safeties taken in front of him. I think he's the type of guy that when you look at Watts, he's going to be a guy that is going to surprise when he's there. He's never going to wow you with any physical trait. He's just a very smart football player. And those are usually the guys who stick around for long periods of time. And so, is he going to be a Pro Bowl player? I don't know. But I do think he's going to be a guy that's going to stick around in the NFL for quite some time. I think that the interesting thing was Kaiser going a little bit higher than maybe some thought. I think that says a lot about his smarts and what people think about him. It is a very cerebral position. And so I wasn't quite as surprised by that. Riley Mills going where he did, I think he would have went much higher had he, not had the injury and that type of thing. I think he's got an NFL career, especially because he has the ability to rush the passer, which is a big priority in the NFL. And, of course, Riley Leonard, I thought he landed at a good spot there, Jamie. And I'm excited about where he landed. I think that's a good situation for him. Obviously, you have Daniel Jones there and Richardson, but I don't think either one of those guys has really established themselves as an NFL quarterback. So he has an opportunity. And, of course, Mitch Evans also gets drafted. And, with the Panthers, I don't know much about their tight end situation there. But
Tommy Tremble.
Yeah. Besides that, I really don't know much more about that. But I'm sure he'll get a shot. And then, of course, some undrafted free agents, that type of stuff. I mean, overall, were you surprised by any of this?
I wasn't surprised by where any of the guys went. I mean, maybe Kaiser going as early on day 3. I thought maybe he was probably going to be like a 5th round, but I wasn't not shocked that he was like a 4th round guy. Maybe just that he was like so early in the 4th round. But I wasn't really surprised. Like I kind of knew that, someone like Watts, because just the safeties, if you look at it, like, he was, I think, the 5th safety off the board. Like I figured he was going to slot in anywhere from like 3 to 5 in terms of the safeties and stuff. And if you look at like, where everybody else went, it's just kind of like, that's how kind of like safety is viewed. I think if he was a different position, he would have went higher, right? Like that's, really kind of what it boiled down to. And I do think like he's got a chance to have a really good career, right? Like it'll just, I think he's going to look a good spot for him. I think he's, and like you said, he's a really smart player. So I don't know, like in terms of him, like making like a ton of Pro Bowls or whatever. We'll see. But like, it wouldn't surprise me if the guy plays like 10 years in the league or something like that. Like I think that's definitely on the table for him. I think with Mills, I think Mills would have had a chance to be a day 2 pick if he didn't knee, right? Just because if you think about it, like you said, he's absolutely like checks all the boxes in terms of like size and everything, like NFL projectables in terms of that. He would have tested really well too. Like he was a guy who like has really good like explosive type numbers that would have testing numbers that would have, I think, done really well in that thing in terms of like combine stuff and like getting people's attention. And I think too, his like versatility of him being like a guy who's like a 3 tech, but he could play a little bit of like, 4-eye, play in like a 3 down front. And I think that's, super valuable to have. Right. So he would have, I think maybe would have had a chance to be like a third rounder or something like that if he, was healthy. And I really wasn't surprised that any of the guys who weren't taken just because, I think it's something Greg and I talked about last week too. Like Howard Cross, I mean, if he went out last year, I think he would have got selected, right? He would have got selected. It just his year, because he was like hurt the whole year. He just wasn't the same level of player, so the tape wasn't as good. And then he didn't test. He was a guy who absolutely needed to test like off the charts, and he just didn't. But it's not to say that he doesn't have like explosiveness on tape. He does when he's healthy. So I think he does have, he'd be a guy I think has a shot to make their team, right? Like to me too, because one other thing, he can rush the passer, right? And they're not going to ask him to play nose guard. I don't think he's not a nose guard. I know he played that for Notre Dame, but like he's not going to be a nose in the NFL. He's not going to have to do that. So he's going to be more of a 3 tech, maybe a situational pass rusher type guy that can fill in. I think if you look at like, say, like Sheldon Day had, a pretty like, decent career where he was like a, backup defensive lineman for a number of years, played like maybe 6-7 years in the league. That's on the table for Cross. It could happen for him. Brandon Renshaw just brought him up. I wasn't even planning on that, but yeah, that's he brought it up in the comments. I think Evans too is I don't know like where in terms of like I don't think they don't have like a defined like tight end 1 in terms of who is going to be that guy for Carolina. But I think it's a good situation because it's a young team and he's going to have a chance to kind of like grow with like Bryce Young and those guys that they have there and do really well. And always too, because he's a guy who can play in line. He has got a chance to play in the league for a long time. You look at like a guy like Durham Smythe, and Durham Smythe is still in the league, and he was not. Yeah, and he is not a guy that I think if you said out of all the Notre Dame tight ends in the last, 15 years, he's probably like the lowest in the totem pole in terms of like production and everything that he did at Notre Dame. Yet he's still hanging around the league because he's like an adequate blocker who can catch the ball, right? Like, and he's a smart guy. He's like a guy who can play in a pro system. So I think there's going to be a place for Mitchell Evans for a long time. And I just really hope too, like a guy like Ben Morrison is healthy, because if he's healthy, he is a guy who could be like multiple Pro Bowls and like have like a great career.
It's one of those things, and it's important for Notre Dame to have a guy like that, to continue along the tradition of we're starting to build this tradition of great cornerback play at Notre Dame. And so for Ben Moe to continue to, play well at the next level, Cam Hart has certainly done a good job so far, being coached by Mickens and surviving in the NFL so far. And I think if they can just get Ben Moe to play well, and of course Xavier as well. But again, I think with Xavier, it's just that is such a cerebral position, and that's why I'm surprised that it took him that he fell as much as he did. I mean, me personally, I know Malachi Sparks is a better athlete, but I know which guy I'd rather have on my team. I really do, and it's Xavier Watts has proven it over and over and over again. Where Sparks is a good player, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think he's been as impactful. Now he runs out there and looks good doing it, but it doesn't matter if you don't make it the same amount of plays. And so, I know things are, the league is bigger, it's faster, it's stronger. I get that. And so I understand why the league gets excited about certain measurables and things like that. But I think when it comes down to it, it's also a productivity league, and that's why you'll see guys stick in the league for longer than a lot of people think, and it's because they're productive, they're smart players, and I think that's what you'll get with Xavier Watts when it's all said and done. All right, I wanted to, I'm not going to get into the whole, rest of the draft and all that type of stuff. Nobody really cares about the whole Shedeur Sanders and all that crap. I don't think that that's important to the discussion today. What I do think is important, though, Jamie, is the fact that Notre Dame had 0 first-round draft picks. Their second-round draft pick barely played. It barely played at all last year. And when you look at some of the guys, a lot of the guys that got drafted weren't there at the end, as far as weren't able to play. And Howard Cross and Riley Mills. And yet Notre Dame was still able to go very deep in the playoff to the national championship game. And it's quite remarkable because they just didn't have a ton of players. I mean, when Michigan won their national championship a couple years ago, they had a bunch of players that went into the NFL the next, that spring, and then a whole bunch more coming the next year, which was this year. So it makes sense. It makes sense why Michigan won the national championship, because they did have a lot of NFL caliber players. Now, I do think that Notre Dame has a bunch of NFL players and maybe even potential first-round picks on the roster currently. But they're not quite there yet. They're not quite developed, all those types of things. And I think that they'll get there. But I do think it says a lot about the coaching that Notre Dame had this year as far as their coaching staff. I think it says a lot about the culture that they've created. And let's be honest, that's a difficult thing in today's portal. It's a difficult thing in today's NIL world. And I don't think that there's any team in the country who's done a better job of figuring out who they are going to be in the portal and NIL world and preparing for that and executing that. And, I think Notre Dame's going to be fine in the NIL business once we get all this kind of stuff settled. They're never going to take as many crazy players in the portal as a Miami or some of these other teams. And I think that's good. I really think that that's a good thing. And they've done a great job. So you got to give Marcus Freeman a tremendous amount of credit for what he's built here, how he's managed it, what he's created, the personnel positions that he's hired. We're starting to see, now with Chad Bowden gone, the vision that Marcus Freeman has for the administrative situation and how that is paying off big dividends already in recruiting, which we're going to talk about here shortly. I just think it speaks volumes. I think Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman have done the best job when you consider the success that they've had based off of that and the talent, that the NFL has just spoken. I think it speaks a lot about where Notre Dame is right now as far as planning and preparing for what has happened in really a dramatic, huge, sizable change in college football in really the last 3 or 4 years. So get your opinion on that, and then we'll talk some recruiting, Jamie.
I think it's incredible. What obviously what Notre Dame did last year, considering all the things that went against them in terms of Howard Cross not being healthy pretty much the whole year, not being healthy at the end of the year, Mills missing the playoff, pretty much the entire playoff after got hurt and missed half the game against Indiana, missed the last 3.5 games. Botello, who would have probably, if he would have played like he did the whole season, he would have been gone. He'd be in the NFL right now. He would have been drafted. So they didn't have him. Mitchell Evans, you'd say, oh, well, he's going to have a worse year than he had the year before because he's coming back from the ACL and all that. And just all these other things that, compounded. Ben Morrison is your best. I think most people would have said Ben Morrison. What you argue between him and Xavier Watts, who's your best player on your team. And you would have said that Ben Morrison's going to miss half the year and he's not going to play in the playoff. You'd say, no, Notre Dame had no chance to do any of the stuff that they did. And they still did it. Which goes to show that, yeah, they had a lot of good depth and young talent, but they developed that talent. They got those guys ready to play. And I think through it all, Mike, you look at where they're at, they didn't go and lose the players that they lost that would have been kind of contributing players this year. Yeah, okay, it would have been good if Rocco and Coogan would have stayed, but they might not have started. They probably wouldn't have started, right? So those guys weren't going to start. Even if you said Pendleton or Urlacher, those guys were the only guys that left really. And Angeli, I'm not going to count because it's one of the quarterbacks is going to leave anyways. That's it. From the team. They didn't lose anybody else. They went through this whole spring portal. Everyone's like, well, after spring, these guys are going to go. No, they didn't. They didn't. What does that say about the culture that they have, the NIL, organization that they have, how they've structured that guys want to stay, that also too, a lot of the guys that were brought in too, value the things that brought them to Notre Dame and has kept them there. I'm not saying that whatever, there were names that we heard that guys might leave and this guy and whatever, but in the end, they all stayed. And I think that says a lot about where things are at. It also says a lot about where things are going in terms of the vibe of the entire program of there's real kind of positive momentum within the program and what they've done and what they've built. And really too, it is culture, but it's more than culture because it is talent too, because they didn't go into this spring portal thinking, man, they're not like Miami, where Miami's we got to get receivers or, USC, we got to get as much guys as we can get. All these, they aren't in those positions. Even Georgia was we need to get guys, and they did get guys, right? And Texas too, and they got guys for sure, but they weren't in a position where they needed all this stuff. It's they kind of came out of spring thinking hey, we're in a pretty good spot with a lot of things. We don't really need to bring in an extra body to just kind of that might rock the boat of what we already have. And I think you just got to tip your cap to Marcus Freeman and the support staff, the recruiting staff, the scouting staff, everybody, on the staff period, because if there were any kind of bad vibes, something would kind of leak out where people would leave or they want to try to bring it. Just didn't happen. So they're in a really good spot. It's like we say it all the time, but it's a good time to be a Notre Dame fan.
It totally is. And I think you bring up the most important point, which is the fact that, these guys didn't leave. And a lot of these guys had a lot of big offers, financial offers, and from good schools. And, the fact that Notre Dame came out of this where they felt like they didn't even need to go get anybody in the spring means that they're very satisfied with their roster. But two, you got a brand new GM, you got a brand new guy in the recruiting office. The whole thing is turned over. So you don't have any relationships with this. Could you imagine if Brian Kelly was the head coach and all this would have happened? Do you think they would have kept half these players? Not a chance. Not a chance, because they wouldn't have stayed for Brian Kelly. I guarantee you they wouldn't have. He didn't have that kind of relationship with the players that Marcus Freeman did. So somebody had to go to him and say, look, guys, I know you're getting bigger offers, but we're doing great things here. We want you to stick around. And, you mentioned Cougar and Rocco. They didn't even pursue them to stay. They knew that they were going to move on at offensive line at other positions and, for other guys. And so they really haven't lost anybody the
guys that they wanted to stay.
Yeah, they haven't lost a single guy of consequence. And then they felt like after going through spring practice, guess what? We don't need anybody either. And, we were able to negotiate and keep everybody here with a GM that nobody really knows, a recruiting guy that nobody really knows at this point. And I just think it's a masterful job by what Marcus Freeman has built. And I thought, I think obviously you got to give Mike Martin credit in that, he's the money guy. He's the guy that's out there having these conversations with Marcus. So he has to obviously do a good job of communicating and clearly has done a good job of that. And to me, I'm just really excited about what all this means. And when you have your players wanting to stick around, where obviously they probably have a better chance to play somewhere else. They certainly have in a lot of situations a chance to make more money, but they still want to stay at Notre Dame. I think that says a lot, and that's with having to go to school. That's with having to get up at 7:00 in the morning and trudge through snow and ice to go to school. These are the things that are the negatives, and these players currently on campus realize that, what, I'm still going to put up with this crap because I believe in what we're doing here. And that, I think, says a lot about the culture and what they've built. And so very, very excited about that. And so we're going to switch that now to recruiting. And, I think things have gone, as we mentioned, Jamie, things have gone extremely well here. They just picked up another commitment in Aiden Pouncey. I wanted to get your thoughts on Aiden Pouncey. I have some of my own, and then we're going to talk some more recruiting. But let's start with Aiden Pouncey and this pickup and what you think of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an important pickup. Obviously, they needed to at DB. They have Chasten Smith at corner already. I view Pouncey as a safety. I know he's could play corner. He's a pretty good receiver too. He's a good athlete, right? But I do think that, like, just based on kind of what I've seen, I know that there's the stuff with the track times. There was a big argument about his track times in the My Film Don't Lie piece on him. Yeah, 11:05. It is not elite speed, and definitely not like elite speed for a corner. But I think that there have been guys who have played corner that and get faster and stuff too. But I just think too, he's a guy with good ball skills. Obviously, you see him here like as a returner. The guy does a lot of stuff. He's just a good ball player, but he's a really good tackler, like a very, very good tackler, and
good instincts.
Just really good instincts. And definitely, I think for the people that remember, when his brother was committed to Notre Dame. I mean, I don't really blame his brother for being one of the guys who decommitted from Notre Dame. That was during that 2016 season. That was a lot of guys decommitted that time. You can't really blame a lot of them for what was going on. But I will say this too. And his brother obviously went to Texas and then transferred to Florida. He's a better prospect than his brother. Like he's a better prospect than his brother. And I think he has a chance to be a really good player for Notre Dame. I like him. I'm a fan of his. I think, he's in the kind of mold a little bit, maybe not quite as good of a, just speed wise as like a Tay Johnson, but he's kind of in that same mold, I would say. Like he's definitely like a field safety. I see him.
I do as well. I was surprised about the 100-meter time. I was really kind of surprised by that because it doesn't show that on film. What he does show is a very good suddenness burst, explosive player when it comes to, crashing down and making tackles, and very physical player as well. And so I like him. I think he's an underrated player, and I know for a fact he's somebody they really liked and wanted. So this was a big pickup in their eyes. And again, you can't teach 6'3". I don't know if he's exactly 6'3", but he's at least 6'2" for sure. And,
I think he's like 6'2.5" and around there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a good football player. Very, very excited about it. And, Jamie, I look at the commitment list and they've got obviously a lot of really good players committed right now. When, all the players are a 90 and above on your scale, that's usually a good thing. There's been in the past some 80s and low 80s and things like that. But I personally like all the guys committed. And then, Jamie, I look at the situation and I say, wow, let's look at the target list. And we already got a quarterback. We're in good we know what that situation is. But when you look at running back, you've got Brian Bonner, you've got Javian Osborne, you got DeStephen Walker and Jonas Walton. I would say certainly for Walton and Osborne, Notre Dame's at least, if not the top school, at least 1A. I believe they're the top school for both. With Bonner, I think that they're at least in the top two, and the same probably with Walker. And if you land two out of those guys, I think it's tremendous. And the nice thing that I like about them, Jamie, is they kind of got these backs that are a little bit bigger right now in Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young, and they're going to be losing two speed guys and Jeremiah Love and JD Price. And it was important to pick up some speed, and Osborne certainly brings that. Jonas Walton just ran a 10.6, which is pretty good for his big physical body style.
Oh yeah, it's great.
For DeStephen Walker, he's a fast dude. Brian Bonner, very fast. I think he's a 10.4. That guy can flat fly. I mean, man, you land two out of those guys, I'm feeling pretty good. Notre Dame's certainly going for speed right now at wide receiver. Braden Robinson is a guy that's certainly a speed guy that they're after. Bubba Frazier, they've already got a commitment from. Very fast guy. Dylan Faison's another guy that's got speed. Kadon Finley's a little bit bigger, but also a guy who can run away from people, Jamie. He's a guy that can, get vertical and run away from people. So I do think that you need a big body there. I'm sure that we'll probably see a few names surface after this May evaluation. I'm sure they're going to go look for a couple bigger body receivers. I think that they're in pretty good situation right now at tight end. Matt Ludwig is a guy who just came in. Ian Premer, although a lot of people think it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to get Premer from Kansas State, kind of grew up a fan there. That may be the situation, but they're also in great shape right now with Evan Jacobson, a guy they like quite a bit, Isaac Jensen. At offensive line, they want to get one more. They got a great shot at Grayson McKeo, who I like quite a bit. I love Ekene Ogboko. I think that guy's a stud too, and he's scheduled to visit. I think they got a better shot there than I originally thought. That's impressive. And then you look at all the defensive linemen, man. I mean, they are just so stacked right now. I feel like they lead for Elijah Golden. I feel like they lead for Mikael Blade right now. Xavier and Griffin Haynes, I think they're at least in the top two, probably in the top two with Dre Quinn. I think that they're in at least the top two for Noah Clark, probably the leader for Tiki Hola. And then they've offered a whole bunch of guys in case this doesn't work out, and Tavian Branch and David Schwarzel and Alistair Vallejo, in case they don't fill what they're looking for. But I think that they probably will. But I like all three of those guys. I think they're good players too. At linebacker, it's going to be interesting. I look at the linebacker situation, Jamie, and they have 11 guys right now that will be in, on the roster. And then you look at kind of the depth chart, and, Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, it looks like they can come back if they want. Everybody could be back next year. And so I just don't think linebacker is a huge need for Notre Dame right now. I think if they land two, they're in really good shape. And I think right now, obviously they've got Thomas Davis, who's a great player and somebody they wanted. And then I think that they have a good shot at Jacoby Clapper, who I know both you and I like. You land those two, I feel really good about it. I think it was important to get Pouncey because you have Smith, and now I know they'd like to get three more defensive backs, and that's certainly possible, but there's not a lot of room in error for corner right now. I think Joey O'Brien will be one of them for sure. I shouldn't say that. I think he'll be a corner. I don't know whether for sure he'll be in the mix or not, but I think that they're probably in the top two. I think they'll get Nick Reddish as another possible safety. So then you got to find another corner to go with. If you get Joey O'Brien, you got to get one of Kari Adams or Jordan Thomas. And I think that it hopefully is possible. But, if you only end with Joey O'Brien, if you do get him and Chasten Smith, that's not the end of the world either. But you got to hope that they can get a third. And I think the important thing was getting Pouncey, because I do think you're going to get Reddish at safety. Now you've got two safeties that will allow you to play Joey O'Brien at corner and then that gives you an opportunity to get one of Adams or Jordan Thomas, and maybe even Jaziel Hart. He's also in the mix as well. I don't know. How you feeling about all this?
I mean, Greg, you want to jump in here first?
I got to get into this track and field conversation. This is my area. I'm very I get very particular about people in track times, and there's context to all these things. 11:05 for a sophomore, and if you go look, he doesn't run that many races, right? So there's some guys, like, they go out and they run a couple races in track. Like he has 4 100-meter times over the span of a track season. Like, that's nothing, right? Like, he's not a serious track athlete. You run 11:05 as a sophomore, like, that is, he's at the size that he is, at the weight that he is, like, he is a football player. That's perfectly fine. Like, I'm looking right now, like, Leonard Moore as a junior, his 200-meter time, 23:47, which is pedestrian, right? Like, that is
Bryant Young ran a faster 200.
Yeah. Like, that is a worse time than an 11.
Bryce Young. Sorry,
meters.
Not Bryant. Yeah.
And I think Leonard Moore is a pretty good athlete, right? Like, I 11:05 for what his size is and for what how often he runs and how seriously he appears to be taking track. It's perfectly fine. Speed should not be anyone's concern with him as a corner or safety or whatever it might be. I guarantee you, Kyle Hamilton does not run 11:05 anything. And I think he's a pretty good football player. So people settle down in the film. Don't lie about that. I got to get that off my chest. I can't let that stuff slide, Jamie.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Honestly, too, that's great context too, because I think one of the things too is that everything kind of, people look at it as universal, but they don't realize too that, like, what you run in your state, and if, like, you win state somewhere, but you don't have as fast a time as, like, the state champion in Georgia, sometimes that is related to the guys you compete against. Like,
yeah,
very much like, if you're winning, you're not really, like, you're trying to run to win more than you are trying to. I know you're supposed to race against yourself, but it's true. Like, it is a very much a thing of, like, you run towards the times that are, like, within your state a lot, and that, like, kind of fits. And I also think it was very funny too, Mike, when I saw, like, during the draft, when there's the guy from South Carolina who was, like, a big safety, and he had, like, freakish, just absolute, like, freakish combine numbers and all that. And it was like him and Derwin James, and he was compared to Derwin James and Kyle Hamilton. And it's like, well, one of these guys didn't have freaky combine stuff, and it was Kyle Hamilton. But it's like, but he's a freak. He's still a freak. Like, it's just so obvious too. Like, when you see him on the field, that it doesn't matter how fast his 40 is, because he runs plenty fast.
Well, the other thing too, especially in the sprints, is if you follow it a little bit, even a little bit, you'll notice that a lot of times at the beginning of the year, guys run something, and as they get better at it and more times, their times keep coming down. And if you only run it a couple times, you're not a serious track athlete. You're not somebody who's doing it over and over and over. And if you watch, again, most of the times as the season goes on, 100-meter times tend to go down quite a bit. You know, they may start at, say, 11 flat, and then creep down to 10.6 or 10.5, you know, just depending on the season and how it goes and who you're running against. So again, I just don't think it's that important, and people get, you know, too tied up on some of these things. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, and ultimately too, right? Like you said, he's fast on film.
Yeah,
he's fast on the football field. Like, so
nobody's catching him. Yeah.
Yes, that matters. It's like, one of Notre Dame's receiver targets who visited this spring, Mason James, who's from Oklahoma. If you look at him, he's got explosive jumping numbers, but his 40 time is like, not that great. He's a blazer. Watch his film.
Run. Yeah,
he runs away from people. He's not as fast as Bubba Frazier in a 40, but he looks pretty similar to Bubba Frazier running in a lot of ways. So some of that stuff is definitely overrated. But just in terms of getting back to, like, what you said about, like, the class in general, like, yeah, they're in a great position. They're in a really, really great position. I think you want to see, I mean, obviously you want to see them close at certain positions, but I agree with, just kind of like starting with like the defense. I love how they offered these guys because, like these guys are all good players. The new defensive tackles that they offered, like, and that's just one of those things where I always thought that was the big problem was like Notre Dame has these guys. Yes, they're leading for them or they're right up there. And then they're just like, okay, we're just going to focus on these guys. It's like, well, what if you strike out?
And 25 years, Jamie. 25 years I've been doing it. And if you had the same philosophy for 25 years, and every time that they don't get what they want in July, it's a disaster to close out the year. And it's just I'm sitting here 25 years. How could you not figure this out in 25 years? But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's been a frustrating thing for me for 25 years. So
it did seem like they figured it out because I think it's easily on defensive line where you feel good about the guys they lead for, like all those guys you mentioned. And I really like I'm a big fan of Tiki Hola. Like, Noah Clark obviously is a type of body that they don't have. You love the two edges they already got in the class, but like the guys that they're after, like they don't have to land. They could probably land only one more edge and be totally fine out of like those three guys that they're really got a good shot at. Right. So, and they still have offered new edges and stuff too. And I think at linebacker as well, like you said, they don't need to be going and looking for new linebackers because I don't think Snead, I would be shocked if he came back. I think
I would too.
Wants to go, right? He wants to go to the league. We'll see with Bowen. It just depends on the type of year he has. But yeah, like you said, most of the guys are going to be there. They're going to have a pretty deep room. The only reason I think you might want to have so many different linebackers, especially with like, it eventually being 105 or whatever it's going to be, those are just core special teams guys for the most part. So that's why I think like when you're always looking at it and you're like, they only play two linebackers for the most part. It's like a nickel defense era, right? Like that's what you play basically with only two linebackers, but you always need linebackers. You always do for these other core special teams as well. And I would say like, I don't like you wish they had a little bit more margin for error at corner. At the same time, it does always seem like Mike Mickens kind of gets his guys, so it's like he rarely strikes out when it comes down to it. So if they follow up there, I think they're going to be pretty good on defense because I think, like you said, they're in a good spot at safety right now. They're a really, really good spot. And I really just like everybody that they've kind of landed so far too, that like, I just think everybody's got a shot to be good, which is when you're looking at like, the offensive line. And I do think to me, it does change the view of how I view the whole entire offensive line class if they land Ugboko, because I just think he's a different level of prospect than the guys that they have currently. Even though I like Grayson Keogh and I think he's underrated and probably is got like maybe as high ceiling as a bunch of other guys ranked above him. But I think Ugboko is an important guy. If they were able to do that, that's a huge win. I think that's a massive win. I will say that, Matt was just at the Under Armour camp in Ohio. Sullivan Garvin worked out there. Obviously, Ben Nichols worked out there too. He got an invite to the Under Armour game. Congratulations to him for that. And obviously he's a good prospect. Sullivan Garvin is going to be a good player. He is a really, really good athlete. He's one of those guys who's a composite 3-star right now. He is not going to stay a composite 3-star. He plays against low-level competition, but you look at him and he can compete with much higher levels because he is an exceptional athlete for a guy who's 300 pounds. Like he
moves well.
Yeah, he moves really well. I love that Matt Ludwig kid. I know he plays against, it's not good competition in the state of Montana. No one would be, no one is going to argue against it. But if you look at him and what he does, his measurements and all this kind of like verified track stuff and all that, it's like exceptional. He's an exceptional athlete, and he's just obviously just a man among boys there. I think he's sky high ceiling and would be, to me, it's just like he's right up there kind of with Bremer as like would be the guys that I would want them to land at tight end. I'll wait and see, kind of like, because I don't really know. It hasn't really. We haven't really got a good feeling of like, okay, this is exactly how it's going to go. So I wouldn't say I'm worried about tight end for them, but like, I think that, you just kind of want to see how it kind of plays out. Certainly I like all the guys that they're in on and they're kind of like in contention for. So we'll just see how it plays out. And they always, the other thing is, if you look at NFL draft wise too, there's so many tight ends that are just underrated because it's not a thing that people get right often because they undervalue certain things. And you look at, there's guys who are athletes that are just physically develop more. They learn to become better blockers because they've been not asked to do certain things within their offense, and they come and they develop at Notre Dame. So I'm not worried that even if they like don't end up getting exactly who they want, they're going to get good prospects there. They'll be fine. They'll be fine at tight end. Wide receiver, I just think, speed, obviously love Bubba Frazier and kind of where they're at. Like, and I do think like getting him, if you got like him and Braden Robinson with that kind of speed there, I think that is ideal. Size is the one thing missing. I like the Brian Williams Jr. kid. I know he visited. Didn't hear a lot about him. I think he's super underrated. He looks to me much faster than you would think a guy, and moves better for a guy at his size. So, being like a legit 6'4". So I'll be interested to kind of see if they're kind of in there with him. Running back, like, man, they're going to land two studs. It's going to be, it's going to be good what they're going to do there. And obviously it looks very, very good with Osborne right now, who I'm a fan of. I think he's a very similar player to JD Price in a lot of ways. Especially with his like just explosive kind of laterally, like really good feet. And if I had a choice of like who I think would be the best to kind of pair with him, I would lean towards Brian Bonner, just because, like, you mentioned that 10-400 meters. Like, yeah, I mean, he can. That shows up on the field, man. He can fly, but everybody else, that they're after is pretty darn good too. They've done a good job there. No surprise that Jawan Slider has kind of like hit the ground running there.
Yeah. Very excited to see how it all unfolds. And as we mentioned, we know that Osborne's going to make a decision fairly soon here. Tiki Hola is going to make an announcement very soon here. If you get those guys kind of in before their, official visits and everything, I think that's a good thing, man. I think it'd be nice to have a interior defensive lineman logged in, and certainly a running back, and then you can kind of then pick and choose, because I do think that there's going to be multiple people who are wanting, one position or two positions. And so I think it's important to kind of, hopefully they can get a few of these guys committed even before the official visits start. Cause then that allows you to kind of focus on who you really want after that. And so we'll see what happens, but it's crazy because I think back to about a month and a half ago where I started to get excited about this, and people are like, why is Mike so excited? And it's like, well, because I think that they're actually going to close on these guys for once. I think that that's what we're going to see that happens with the rest of these guys too. I think Notre Dame's going to close well. I'll be very surprised if they don't close well, because I think they're in fantastic position right now and doing a great job. So, all right, Jamie, we got a bunch of questions we're going to end with here. And so let's just get to them. Spring has come and gone. Who impressed you the most, and who are you most disappointed in the progress of? First of all, I don't think it's fair for us to say most disappointed in the progress of anybody.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really get to see him play. We just and everybody can have one bad day, or two bad days. So I don't think that's really fair to just point out anybody that we're extremely disappointed in. As far as let's start with you. Who impressed you the most that you saw?
Um, I mean, Eli Raridan certainly is near the top of the list. I think of kind of what you wanted to see as him kind of like being like the starting tight end and what you want to kind of see out of it. And like you said, we only saw like really 2 full days, so it's not a lot to go off of, but he looked fantastic on both those 2 days. So that was definitely a really positive development. I mean, I'm going to cheat and just say kind of like the defensive tackle situation in general, because that was like a question going into spring of like, whoa, they got a lot of guys there, but can all these guys play and whatnot? And I really think all the guys can play. It's just going to be determining like which guys are the rotation guys and which guys play the most and who's going to kind of step up the most. But I think, people saw obviously Jared Dawson have like a real big impact in the spring game. I think he obviously is going to be heavily in the mix there. And like Jason Onye, like I think that was another guy who like people didn't know he was going to be what his status was going to be for this season. And the fact that he, practice in full looks very similar to the guy that was really coming on midway through last season. I think that's a huge, huge development. I think like KVA and Snead at linebacker, definitely. Tay Johnson, safety, huge. That's a huge development. That's the reason Kennedy Airlocker's gone, pretty much, because like he's kind of established himself as like he is very much going to be a factor for Notre Dame. How big of a factor this year, we'll see, but like he's definitely going to be a factor for Notre Dame. And then I would say, like, if I'm going to go like a sleeper guy kind of like further down the depth chart, but like, wasn't on my like radar of like, yeah, definitely this is the guy to watch, was Cole Mullins. Cole Mullins really like, had to play a little bit of end because they were, short some ends this spring, but also too, like watching him rush the passer from the interior. To me, Mike, and I know we talked about him a lot last year, like basically like how he kind of impressed us is like, we didn't think, a guy who's moving in being undersized really would look as good as he did. But, we thought this guy's got a shot. And to me, he looks like he's got a real shot to be a factor at some point for Notre Dame, if not this year, going forward for sure.
I agree on Cole. I liked him, even on his film, and I'd add Carson Hobbs to that mix too. I remember watching his senior film and going, "Wow, this guy's going to be pretty good." And then, boy, he showed out. And I think that's good. But I also think that the Tay Johnson stuff's important. It really is, and I think that they have some good options back there now. But just to have a guy that's the future. And this could be a situation where Notre Dame's in the same situation at safety as they were at quarterback, right? Where you may have a better, safer choice, but boy, if you want to shoot for the stars, and you want somebody that could be an extra special first-round draft pick type of guy, that's a guy who has the measurables to be a first-round draft pick. And so it may not be this year that they have that decision to make. But it could be this year, or it could be in the middle of the season. A guy just continues to play well, and then he takes over the job at some point. But I really like his potential, and I'm excited to see where he continues to improve. And then are you surprised by the lack of portal entrance? No, not really. I don't think that we are. The only thing I would say, Jamie, the only thing I'm not a little bit more surprised about was I thought maybe another O-line or two would jump in there. But that hasn't happened. But, again, maybe that's preparing for 105. Maybe they just these kids just want to keep fighting. And if that's the case, that's a good thing too. So, all right. With the ACC settlement with Clemson and FSU, when is ND's annual game with Clemson supposed to begin? Don't know. I really don't know about that. I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to that. I probably should, but I just haven't. Have you heard anything about ND's extension on ND series with USC? I've not heard anything about it other than, yeah, I don't know whether USC wants to continue with it. I guess we'll see. I've heard some rumblings they may not, but then again, I don't know. I think that'll probably be decided here very, very soon.
Truly
Uh,
pathetic if they stop playing
yeah,
it. Coward
yeah,
energy.
I just, I get that they have to travel a lot, but that's just it is what it is.
Notre Dame's traveling there too, you know.
And they've
Same
done
thing.
it for years, and
Yes.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. We mentioned it previously on Power Hour. Now all of a sudden everybody wants to talk about, oh, well, they have to travel all the time. Well, nobody ever said that when Notre Dame was doing it constantly for decades, going East Coast, West Coast, South, Southwest. They did this over and over and over for decades, and nobody's made any big deal like it was anything taxing on the team. And then all of a sudden you start seeing teams from the East or the West Coast having to do it, and Big Ten teams, and everybody's like, oh, well, it's really making an impact. Yeah, well, it made an impact on Notre Dame for decades. So, a guy wants to know, do we actually believe that he was running third to call Minchie, meaning Stephen Jelly? What I'll say about this, and I mentioned this on the board, is I had heard before the spring game that Marcus had felt that Minchie and Carr were the two. Now, I want to specifically say, not in that order. It's just that he felt that those were the two best quarterbacks before the spring game. I feel very confident, based off of where this came from, that that's how he felt about it. And the spring game probably, I don't want to say verified that, but I what I will say is I don't think Steve did anything in the spring game to show that shouldn't be the case. And I don't think Steve played bad. I just didn't think he played any better than the other two. So I don't think this was a situation where Angeli was number 2 and then decided, well, if I'm not going to start, I leave. I just think that they probably went to him. And again, I don't know this for a fact because I don't know what the conversation was with Steve. But my guess is they probably went to him and said, Kenny and CJ are going to start, or they're going to be the two that battle. If you got to do something, we fully understand and support you. That would be my guess is how it went down, just based off the information that I knew before. So I just wanted to put that out there. Why did Kennedy Urlacher transfer? I think that's pretty obvious. He was in a log jam, and there just was no opportunity there for him. And other places like USC had more of an opportunity to play early, and so I don't blame him for that. Jim, flip this to you. Please compare the strengths and weaknesses of KVA, Bowen, and Sneed.
I mean, I don't know if I want to go like fully, like, say like, because I do know that whatever people listen to this podcast and they like will take it the wrong way if I say like this is this guy's weakness or whatever. I'll just say that I think that they're different, and then I think that like Bowen, I think, has kind of like, I wouldn't even put him. He's almost like in a separate conversation because he has clearly established himself as a guy who can play all 3 downs, super smart, obviously like a guy who's like established himself as a leader on the team, make an impact as a blitzer, do a lot of really good things. Like, he doesn't have a lot of like areas where you're going to say like, man, this is a thing where, you could say maybe some guys are better, at maybe certain things, like KVA is a better pass rusher than him, or there's this or that. But Bowen is good at, like, he's probably the most complete out of them all. I would say KVA, I think you just look at him and like, there's a physicality to him that I think is just different that with everybody else. And also just like, he has a savviness as a pass rusher that is like just way more advanced than I just think that, like, really anybody, any other linebacker on the team. He is the closest to having like veteran defensive line savvy at having that as a linebacker. That's just uncommon, right? And I think he's one of these guys too. You want to see like kind of. I thought he played all right in coverage last year, but I think you want to see him like kind of grow in coverage a bit. And Snead, I think his biggest thing was I think he addressed a lot of his things where he was too small. He was too small, so he would get kind of like kind of pinballed around a little bit versus inside run. He also was like, not confident in his reads, and I think like he would not play as fast as he is. And I think you started to see him. He's playing faster and more confident now, and using all of that physical skill that he has. That's there. I think whether or not like in terms of him being as good of like an inside run guy as the other two, I'd say probably a little bit less. Just based on what we've seen from all these guys. I wouldn't say it's a weakness for him because I think he's definitely enhanced it. I would say that like those two, if I'm looking at two teams, they're gonna play a team that's heavy inside run, playing KVA and Drake together makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right. It's taken a while but D-line recruiting is finally getting to a place where it needs to be. Is it fair to say wide receiver recruiting is not taking the same step forwards? And would it be fair to say that QB recruiting is regressing after signing Minchie and Carr? Good questions. CBF Hertz always has some good questions and comments. I think wide receiver recruiting is improving. Is it where it needs to be? No. It's also really hard. It's really hard when you don't put a lot of NFL players in the NFL at the wide receiver position, and you don't have you haven't shown the ability to throw the ball. There's not a lot of star receivers at Notre Dame. There's not a lot of star quarterbacks at Notre Dame. That hurts you. It just does. And I think it's hurt them both in quarterback recruiting and at wide receiver recruiting. Wide receiver needs to get better. As far as the quarterback situation goes, I just don't think 2026 was that good of a year. As far as
I don't like the quarterbacks overall.
I just don't. And so, I think Notre Dame probably got one of the top 10, 12 quarterbacks. Is that good enough? I don't know. I do know I've seen Grubbs play, and it's probably unfair because Matt has done more cut-ups of Grubbs throughout the season than the other quarterbacks. So when you watch some of the other quarterbacks, you don't get to see the errors that they make like you do with Grubbs. And so I'm probably a little harsher on the evaluation of Grubbs than I were of somebody else. But, with Ebert being the same situation, we got to watch kind of his last few games and so with Grubbs, he's played a lot and he's played at a high level. How much better can he get? I don't know. But what I've seen players get a lot better from their junior to senior year. Will he make a jump in that regard? Hopefully. We got to hope so. I don't think he's a bad player by any means. I think he's a good, solid player. Is he elite? No, I don't know. As far as 2025, and he just got hosed. It is what it is. And, they were probably lucky to get Hebert, although, there were other quarterbacks that were out there that they probably could have pursued. Would have I liked them better? I don't know. I would have needed to know a little bit more. But my problem with Hebert is more that he's a good athlete. He has a lot of good tools. I just think he has a ways to go as a quarterback, as understanding reads, as understanding how to get rid of the football, his accuracy, all those types of things. That doesn't mean that he won't get there. He's going to have plenty of time because obviously whoever starts in front of him is going to be playing for at least a couple of years. So whoever these quarterbacks, they'll have plenty of time to develop and that type of thing. But let's be honest. Last year, they got their guy and then they didn't, and that was frustrating. That was very, very frustrating. But had they got that guy, I don't think we would have been thrilled with the situation. But for whatever reason, the kid just didn't want to stick it out. And did Notre Dame read that wrong? Yeah, I think so. But I think part of the reason they read it wrong is now out the door. So that hopefully they'll have a better read on all these situations moving forward. So that's what I would say about all of that. Did the portal window really just come without any additional players entering? I think that they'll probably be in pretty good shape. So we'll see. Have you had a chance to watch?
It's closed now. So unless a grad guy goes in,
they have said something about. I did see somebody saying, well, business days or something like that. I don't know. I just, from my understanding, I don't anticipate any other players getting in the portal based off of things that I've heard. Next question. Have you had a chance to watch Peyton Houston's tape? If so, any thoughts? He's small, but seems like an elite arm, dynamic runner. With the obvious exception of size, his trait seems to better than some of the 2027 quarterbacks have shown interest in. I have watched it. Yama, have you watched this film?
Yeah, but I didn't put a grade on him, but I did watch him. Yeah.
What'd you think?
I mean, I liked him. I'm not super hung up on size like a lot of people are, I guess, with it. Like, I do think that he, I think he does have some dynamic ability, and I'm always going to lean towards someone like that rather than a guy who's, not a statue, but a guy who doesn't have that. So I think that's a positive. I would say I've watched all of I haven't graded, but I've watched all of the 2027 guys that they've kind of like are on the kind of radar. And I would say Peyton Houston is definitely a guy that I could see them going after. I think there's a big thing, and it's kind of leading back to what you were just talking about, Mike. There's a lot of trying to get in on this, it's like musical chairs with quarterback. It's like, oh, you got to get in because you might lose your chance of getting anybody, right? There is that kind of thought process with it, but so many of these guys commit so early and then end up not even sticking in the end that I don't think that is as big of a deal as it was before, where you kind of have to have we got to get a quarterback to help build our class and stuff. Well, what does it matter if you got the wrong guy? I just don't think that's as important. And this doesn't pertain to, Peyton Houston. I'm just saying for 2027, I'm glad they kind of waited and have just played it out, because they absolutely need to hit on the right guy in this class because of, what they're doing before. And it kind of leads into what CFP Hertz was saying. If they land that dude in 2027, no one will think that wow, quarterback recruiting took a hit. You'll just be like, whoa, wait, no, they're back. And that happens at a lot of schools. There's very few schools minus Ohio State that I think have really consistently always land the elite guy every year.
Yeah. I mean, to me, because of the previous two, I do think it's important because I think there's question marks with both those guys. I don't think that they're like with Grubbs. I don't think the question marks are as great as they are with Ebert. I don't think so. But again, I'm not 100% sold on either of them at this point. And that's not to say that they're bad players, because that's not what I mean by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that I want to see some progression before I feel real confident about it. So I do think it's important for Notre Dame, whoever they get in 2027, better be a guy that they can count on. I think it's really, really important that whoever they get for 2027 has to be a guy because you just don't know what you're going to get. I do think that the upside for the other two is good. And the floor for Grubbs is high. So, I think he could be certainly a better prospect than Angeli, and a lot of people were ready for Angeli to start, so it's not like I think poorly of Grubbs. I think his floor is higher than Angeli. I think his ceiling is higher than Angeli. So it's not that I think he's a bad player, but folks, we're trying to get to the level, right? We don't want to be at this level. We want to get to here. We want to get way up there. And in order to do that, you got to start landing some of these really, really talented players. And we've seen countless 5-star quarterbacks who don't work out, countless. And so just because they're a 5-star doesn't mean that they're going to succeed. And just because they're a 3-star doesn't mean they're not going to be a first-round draft pick. We've seen that happen over and over again too. So, it's a little too early to say, but I do think 2027 quarterback recruiting is going to be very, very important. All right. Considering all the talent drafted from Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, how do you feel? How did Indy have as much success this past season? Comparable draft picks, blah, blah, blah. Is it just a top-end talent? Is it just younger? Is it coaching? Is it culture? Is it team chemistry? Luck, schedule? Well, first of all, luck was definitely not a part of it. If anything, they had terrible luck. They had absolutely horrible luck. And we're able to overcome that. And so to me, I think it's everything you mentioned there. I think I do. I think it's everything you mentioned there. They've just done a really good job. And Jamie, this is why I think we're seeing it in recruiting. Kids are coming here. They're seeing what Notre Dame has built. And it just looks different at Notre Dame right now than these other places. And kids get when teams are buying in and they're hungry and they're aggressive and they all get along and there's no kind of backstabbing and biting and all this other crap that goes on where all the pettiness and people talking about, oh, this guy got this big NIL deal and that's a big deal and that's important. And the types of people that Notre Dame are going to attract that are going to be successful in this system, they're going to see that immediately when they get on campus. And what we've seen is pretty much everybody who's visited that they wanted, that we felt like would be a good match, every one of those guys has come back, Jamie, and was just blown away. And Notre Dame's either the leader or certainly 1A at this point. And that tells me they're identifying the right people, and 2, their message is really hitting home. And that's why I was so excited about what I think is going to be an outstanding close to this class. And I just think Notre Dame is built different, and kids are coming on campus and they're seeing that. Is it Ohio State? Is it Georgia? Is it Texas? Where it's more about flash? No, I don't think so. But the kids that are worried about, man, I have to go to class. If I go here, I'm going to have to go. Those are the kids that are going to go to Florida. They're going to go to Texas. They're going to go to Ohio State. And there's probably not much you can do about it. There just probably isn't. And, even if you have a great season, you win the national championship, kids that are that turned off by school, you're just never going to get that kid anyway. And so I just think that they've done a tremendous job. And I just I keep saying it every week. I don't remember a time I've been this excited about Notre Dame football since probably 1988. I mean, the sky is so high for me on the culture, what's going on, Notre Dame's commitment. They got the right coach. And again, it's just crazy what one guy can do to a program. And I'm not saying that Marcus Freeman is the only reason that they're winning, but because that's certainly not the case, not even close to being the case. But how one guy can just change everything. And that's what we've seen essentially. Now, he's made a lot of great decisions, and those guys have done a great job of coaching. And the guys that they've made decisions on recruiting have put in the work to do all this. So it is a complete and total team effort. But one guy really kind of changed the face of this. And man, it's exciting to see what's going to happen here. I'm very fired up. Your thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm super fired up to watch it too. And I think, I posted this after, the first or day 2 of the NFL draft. So Georgia's left guard, center, and right guard all got taken on day 2. So they were 2nd or 3rd round picks. And those guys were really good players. And guess what? If you watch your highlights, they are wrecking dudes in the SEC. That's why they're drafted. That's why they're drafted where they are. So why couldn't they run the ball against Notre Dame having Howard Cross on one leg and Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinrich? Well, one, guys like Donovan Heinrich and Gabriel Rubio are better than people think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And the other thing is, like, you have done everything to develop these guys and get them ready to compete at that level. And that comes all the way from like Marcus Freeman, motivating these guys, Al Washington and Nick Sebastian coaching these guys, Lauren Lando and the strength staff, Alexa Applebaum and the nutrition staff, all of these things that they have done to improve the program as a whole have made the program better. And that's why you could see them still have that success despite some of those injuries and all that too. And I was talking with Matt Freeman, Mike, just this weekend, because, you go through the draft and Notre Dame has 6 guys taken. Obviously, they only had 2 guys that go on the first 2 days of the draft compared to like a lot of teams that did a lot worse than them that had much higher picks. And we know some of that has to do with like their youth, right? There's guys who weren't draft eligible that are going to be higher picks. So that's part of it. But, the other kind of thing, though, is that if you just look at like all the way through just the evaluation and development that they've done throughout the program is just at another level because they just don't have as many weak spots, whether it's like a position coach, whether it's the strength conditioning, whatever, all of these things where if you look at Adon Schuler's, his ranking, and I had him ranked higher, but I'm talking about his composite ranking. His composite ranking was pretty similar to like, Litchfield Adjavon.
Yeah.
Look at the difference between those two guys. It's not the same kind of thing. So Notre Dame has done a way better job of evaluating and landing the caliber of athletes needed, but also developing those guys, because with the wrong coaching staff, with the wrong, all this other support, Adon Schuler isn't ready to play at that time against Georgia as in his second year and his first year as a starter. And he's not making that, kind of impact, but all because all those other things in place, he was, and that's why he was able to do that. And that's why too, you're just going to see more and more where I just don't think there's going to be too many years, Mike, where we're going to see Notre Dame have like, they only got 2 guys drafted this year. I think that's over under Marcus Freeman. I think this kind of year where it's like, hey, 5-6 guys drafted is going to be the down year for Notre Dame. And I think you're going to see like 8 plus each year, where that's like breaking records before for Notre Dame. It was like, wow, they had 9 guys. During this next few years, there will be one of these drafts will break the records for the most guys drafted, and it's going to probably get broken again at another point, as long as they kind of Marcus Freeman's still around and, running the program, because they're just doing things at a higher level all around, from recruiting all the way up.
Well, and this goes back to kind of what I was saying way back when people were afraid of, we can't hire a guy who's never had previous head coaching experience. And I get that, because it didn't work out. But as I kept saying, you got to hire the right guy. And did I know that Marcus Freeman would be? Because to me, again, I've been around businesses. I've been around people who've been successful. So much of being successful as the CEO or whatever is you have to hire the right people, right? Because one guy can't do the whole job, right? So I have to hire a Jamie. I have to hire a Matt. I have to hire a Christian and a Greg in order for this thing to go and go well. And then you got to stay out of their way. You got to let them do their job. And if you let people do their job, they love working there, because they don't have somebody looking over their shoulder constantly. And why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? And it's amazing to me that, I knew Marcus Freeman had a lot of great qualities, I just didn't know the one thing that you don't know is, can he hire the right people? Does he have the ability to find the right young talent and put them in places? And, like Chad Bowden, a lot of people are criticizing the guy right now. And, to some extent, yes, I think it's fair. To some extent, no, probably not. But I'd say Chad was probably a good hire in that Notre Dame had to get out of kind of their way of thinking about how you go about recruiting people. And I think he brought some new ideas and new things to the mix. And Marcus Freeman realized, hey, we need that, right? And so he went and found that kind of guy. And then all of a sudden, now he's gone, and now you find some new people to do it. But it looks like, sure enough, they've done it again and hired some great people. So, again, I don't want this to be a Marcus Freeman love fest, but it's quite remarkable that a first-year head coach has done this so well. So, I mean, when you look at everybody else who was hired at the same time, nobody else is having the same success. And then you consider what Notre Dame is, and the difficulty now with portal and NIL. It's just amazing that he has been able to handle and navigate these waters as well as he has. And I think that says a lot of credit to him. A lot of credit to Jack Swarbrick for being smart enough to hire the guy when he knew that it probably wasn't going to be a very popular hire. And it's just, I'm so excited about the future. I just can't wait to see what happens. All right, we got one more question. Mike, the reason that we have seen, or do you think the reason that we've seen such little portal action is due to the fact that the judge ruled the NCAA had to grandfather the walk-ons into the limit, or do you see other reasons for this? Well, I don't think the judge has officially ruled that. I think didn't she say she gave them time to figure this out and make sure that that's part of the settlement? I think that's what she wants them to do. She hasn't finalized it yet. I think that they had 14 days, if I remember right. But
yeah, she said
sure
she wouldn't approve. She wouldn't approve the settlement unless they made that part of it. Yeah, this is what she
exactly.
said.
But it hasn't happened yet, and no. So we don't know what the settlement's going to be. I think part of it is, I don't think Notre Dame was in an eager situation to push a bunch of people that are good players out the door and good people, but also I don't think that those guys wanted to leave either. And when you're part of something that's fun and successful, nobody wants to leave either. I don't think a lot of the guys who left probably wanted to leave. It's just they had a better situation that they pursued. And so I think it's a little bit of both of those things, and that's why we saw that happen. But with the 105, we'll have to see how it all unfolds. And my guess is it's going to change a bunch in the next couple of days or a couple of years anyway, until they kind of get to the right number and massage it and that type of thing. All right, folks, that's going to be it for the show. I hope you enjoyed that. Wanted to mention once again, if you're not a member of Irish Sports Daily, it's a great time to sign up. Go to the front page, click on the premium section. You can sign up today. Also, you can find us on YouTube. Search for Irish Sports Daily. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the videos. It'll allow you to find out when we're doing more and more videos and put our videos in your feed on YouTube when you visit there. So once again, thanks everybody for listening and watching the show. We'll talk to you next week on Power Hour.